Right, let's bring you some breaking news from the UK. And after days and weeks of rumour, we can now confirm that the Home Secretary Suella Braverman has been sacked by Rishi Sunak, and the UK Prime Minister is planning to now undertake a government reshuffle. And of course, he's going to have to find a new Home Secretary. And this news, to be fair, has been somewhat expected by members of the UK press in the past week or two. Braverman has been in the headlines for lots of reasons, including the fact of calling protests against the Israel attack and the Hamas war as hate marches that have been taking place in London, that Braverman has been very outspoken. Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's Question Time last week was looking exceptionally uncomfortable as the Labour leader attacked the Conservative Home Secretary. But it appears now that Sunak has taken the weekend to consider his options. Many thought he might sack her last week, but Rishi Sunak traditionally likes to take his time over such big decisions. He's obviously spent the weekend thinking about it. He's watched yet more difficulties in central London regarding Armistice Day, the Palestinian protests, and just how things have been inflamed. And she has criticised these as a pro-Palestinian mob, saying that the protest scenes were disturbingly reminiscent for those seen in Northern Ireland. And she's also been slamming the Met Police, drawing a huge amount of criticism for her criticism of the Met Police. And she also wrote an article in the Times newspaper, which was very incendiary and had not been cleared by Rishi Sunak or his number 10 Downing Street. So Sunak has now disowned Braverman and has now sacked her. We've seen some pictures have just started to arrive on the wires of Braverman leaving her London home. She is posing for the cameras. It appears like she knows already that she's been sacked when she's leaving her home. And what will be interesting now, with at best a year until the next general election, Rishi Sunak now having to fill one of his great offices of state, Home Secretary, many thinking Michael Gove might be the man to step into the fold. But Braverman has been a key flag bearer for the Conservative right. She has eyes, it seems, on taking leadership of the party one day, and will now perhaps use her status as a sacked minister. She will now perhaps start to drum up support for her own campaign to potentially become the Conservative leader should Sunak fail to win the next general election, which, looking at the polls at the moment, seems increasingly unlikely. She's now going to be out of government, on the backbenches, potentially still causing Rishi Sunak issues, but of course he will not have to sit next to her in the House of Commons and defend her and send other ministers out to defend her, which they've been doing, albeit with bated breath over the past few days. So bringing you that latest news that Suella Braverman has been sacked as the Conservative Home Secretary. She has been in the role for just over a year and is now looking to the future and potentially a tilt at the top job should it come available after a general election widely expected to take place before the end of next year. She will certainly now be using this to fuel her own ambitions, to garner support on the Conservative right, and to probably cause Rishi Sunak no end of trouble, but from the backbenches rather than from the front bench. Okay. Well, let's bring you a little bit more on what Braverman has been saying in recent days, particularly concerning her criticisms of the Met Police. She wrote an article in the Times and she said she was criticising pro-Palestinian mobs, saying the scenes were disturbingly reminiscent to those seen in Northern Ireland. And she had particular criticism for the Met Police for double standards over their handling of protests. Of course, London has been one of the centres for protests against Israel's attack on Gaza in retaliation, of course, to that Hamas terrorism attack on October 7th. And Braverman's articles have been widely condemned by former police officers and MPs, with many on the Conservative centre and the One Nation Conservatives calling for her to be sacked. Rishi Sunak, of course, has taken his time. And I'm delighted to say that Greg Senson has rejoined us to discuss this breaking news. Greg, give us your assessment. A Home Secretary that seemed to be on borrowed time for some time and now without a job.
Yeah, she was on borrowed time. It's a good point, Oliver. No one really expected her to make it through the week. There was some argument that, you want to sack senior government people later in the week so they're not in Westminster, they're back in their constituency. But I think, given that Rishi would have to face question time on Wednesday and be in the position of defending her, it really did make sense to just get it over with right out of the gates Monday morning.
And obviously, Braverman now, who is really one of the darlings of the Tory right, she will now, I imagine, take a step back and start to build her support for a potential run at being Conservative leader. If what we're expecting to happen, which is the Conservatives lose the next election, she will surely have her eyes on that top job, won't she?
Yeah, I think so. I think she'll be better off as a backbencher being able to be critical of the government. And surely the Conservative wing of the party really want, in many ways, they expect to lose next year. And in many ways, it's probably better for them to be able to regroup and then hopefully, have some right-leaning conservative leaders come out of the, of the Labor administration, and then emerge for the follow-on election. So you're absolutely right. I think it'll be Suella, it'll be Kemi, it'll be a handful of the kind of new emerging young conservatives. And it's probably not going to be very good for Rishi in the next year, because he's going to, with this, I think he loses a lot of the support from the conservative wing of the party.
And of course, this comes in the week, as me and you were discussing earlier on, of this Rwanda decision, which is one of the Home Secretary Braverman's key policies. She's been driving this plan, and now all of a sudden it may go through the courts and she's now not in a job to almost take the credit. It's amazing how these two things have lined up at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is Rishi playing a little bit of, inside baseball, as we call it in America. I think he's looking at this as an opportunity for him to, be decisive, fire someone who was facing a lot of criticism for, the article last week that she wrote, that she penned in the Times, being critical of the Met Police. It gives Rishi a chance to distance himself from Suella and some of, and also align with her critics. But I don't think this really helps Rishi in the long run. I mean, the criticism of Rishi is that, he's more of a manager. He's a bureaucrat. He doesn't have a really strong conservative philosophy in the Thatcher style. And I think that's really showing now. So, I mean, I think, as I said earlier, whether the court decision goes the government's way or against the government, either way, it's a real long shot for Rishi to stay in power with the election next year. And this will cause the Conservative Party to really reflect on 13 years of power, especially the last 3 years where they had, an 80-seat majority that we haven't seen since the Thatcher years. And what are the results? What have they actually delivered? There's not much conservative movement philosophy in the Conservative Party right now in terms of their outcomes. There just haven't been any real conservative outcomes from this government.
Absolutely. Greg Senson, international affairs expert, many thanks for joining us again to cover that breaking news. As we say, the Home Secretary Suella Braverman has been sacked. Latest reports saying James Cleverly has walked into Downing Street, the Foreign Secretary. So potentially we may be seeing a swap with Cleverly becoming Home Secretary, and then the UK would need to find a new Foreign Secretary.